conflict between Palestinians and Israelis has been acute and explosive since the 1920s. It has repeatedly erupted into wars and political uprisings, transforming the politics of the Middle East. Israelis and Palestinians have intensified the larger regional struggle over oil resources between the industrialized countries, multinational corporations, Arab states, and various political movements. The ongoing Palestinian-Israeli conflict arises from the two communities' competing claims to land, sovereignty, and resources, with a complex religious and cultural dimension. It emerged in the 1880s when Jewish immigrants began settling on formerly Palestinian lands with the intention of creating a Jewish state. As Jewish immigration increased in the wake of the Holocaust, military and financial support from some Europeans enabled Israel to establish itself on 3/4 of historic Palestine in the 1948 war. This war forced over 700,000 Palestinians from their land, most of them settling in refugee camps in the West Bank, Gaza, and neighboring Arab countries. 20 years later, in the Six-Day War of June 1967, Israel occupied the remainder of Palestine, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, displacing another 400,000 Palestinians. This was the second wave of refugees, whose camps, like those of 1948, remain to this day a living testament to the human consequences of the battle for land and sovereignty. Since 1967, Israelis have continuously established new settlements in the occupied territories and in the Golan Heights to assert their claim to the land and to make their withdrawal from these territories much more difficult. Israeli leaders from both major political parties have envisioned systematic expansion through new settlements towards a greater Israel with its boundaries undefined. The present crisis arises in large part from this active policy of expanding existing settlements and creating new ones in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. The increasing settlement drive has accelerated the confiscation of Palestinian land and water, including 95% of the Jordan Valley, the Palestinians' most fertile agricultural land. Israel has seized nearly 2/3 of the land in the West Bank and Gaza since the occupation began, and 83% of the water. In 1987, these pressures, along with harsh military repression, provoked the Palestinian uprising for national independence, the Intifada. The brutality of the Israeli soldiers against an unarmed revolt and the courage and determination of the young Palestinians to continue their struggle shocked the world.
Very much committed to
Dr. Saib Erekat at Najah University, West Bank.
We're not blind. We're not blind. You know, once you see a government in Israel, the most extremist government in the history of the State of Israel, formed in June 1990 to bring the West Bank and Gaza to a point of no return as far as settlements and demography are concerned. Once you see this government killing people, Palestinians at random, demolishing their homes, confiscating their land, stealing their water, creating an economic war unprecedented, it's obvious that these people don't have the term peace in their dictionary. And if it's going to be a peace by linguistics and for propaganda, then that's a problem for everybody who's going to try to start a peace process.
Nearly 200 Israeli settlements have been established in the occupied territories, with a population of 229,000 by the end of 1991. Soviet Jewish immigrants are among these settlers, and the Israeli request to the U.S. for a $10 billion housing loan guarantee for them has become a key factor in the settlement crisis.
92% of the Jews who lived in the Soviet Union between 1950 and 1990 chose not to come to Israel. They favored to go to the States or Western Europe. If you're going to move the Jews in the Soviet Union in accordance with the Helsinki Accords, why don't you have the same principles of the Helsinki Accords applied, which is that their right to choose where to go. But these people have been denied the right of choice, and they are forced now to come to Israel. Once you force them to come to Israel, to the government of Shamir and Sharon, that means you are encouraging Shamir and Sharon to confiscate more Palestinian land and to build more settlements.
The Israeli government justifies the rapid expansion of settlement building with the claim that it must house the 1 million Soviet Jewish immigrants expected in the early 1990s. Despite these claims, the settlements are the central issue of current negotiations concerning the future of the occupied territories. Palestinians are demanding a freeze on the settlements as a step towards an ultimate solution that will offer them self-determination and an end to the military occupation. Palestinians who have fought for their independence throughout the century now face the prospect of the Israeli annexation of the remainder of their homeland. This is a regional map of Israel and adjacent Arab states. The West Bank and Gaza are the areas occupied by Israel in 1967 and are inhabited by 1.8 million Palestinians. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians still live in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. Here, the West Bank is shown in white, and Jewish settlements are indicated by the black dots. Their distribution clearly indicates the Israeli intention to maintain control of the land permanently. Political control of the 3,000-year-old city of Jerusalem, which both communities consider to be their capital, lies at the heart of the conflict. Israel now occupies the entire city, having captured Palestinian East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. Israelis inhabit the areas of the city shown here in green, which include West Jerusalem and outlying settlements intended to encircle and prevent the growth of Palestinian areas shown in black. Palestinians and their ancestors have inhabited this land for over 8,000 years. Immediately after the 1967 occupation of the Old City in Arab East Jerusalem, Israelis evicted the Palestinian residents of the Maghriba neighborhood to establish the Wailing Wall grounds. 650 housing units were created for Jewish settlers, and 3,000 Jews now inhabit the area. In addition to Jewish settlements inside East Jerusalem, the Israelis built over a dozen massive high-rise settlements around the city's perimeter. Far from the urban pace of Jerusalem is the Jordan Valley, where Palestinians have farmed the land for generations. Mohammed Baladi is planting in September to salvage something from this year's growing season. He was unable to plant this spring because of the 2.5-month Israeli-imposed curfew during the Gulf War. The Israelis measure the amount of water Mohammed pumps from his own well. Above a fixed limit, he is charged for his own water at a rate 6 times greater than that charged to nearby Jewish settlers. The dark green areas on this map of the West Bank show regions that are off limits to Palestinians, including settlements and confiscated land. The large dark green area on the right is the Jordan River Valley and its nearby highlands. This vast area was taken by the Israelis for military use, to establish Jewish agricultural colonies, to secure control of precious water resources, and to destroy the basis of Palestinian agriculture. This orchard in a village near Jericho is dying, its irrigation channel completely dry, a consequence of Israeli water diversion. Gharib Jiflik, a Palestinian farmer from Uja village, lost thousands of dollars this year from his failed banana crop. His parched crops stand right next to the well-irrigated Israeli orchard in the background. Jewish settlers can use water with no restrictions, while their Palestinian neighbors must depend on natural springs. But Israeli deep-bore wells have lowered the underground water table, totally draining the local springs. Israel controls 83% of the West Bank water as a whole, diverting a third of it to Israel proper. The settlers consume 10 times more water per capita than is used by Palestinians, and in 1991, for the first time, Israel refused to sell water to many Palestinians at any price. The abundance of the more than 30 prosperous Israeli agricultural settlements in the Jordan Valley is possible only by depriving local Palestinian farmers of the water they have used for generations. Nevertheless, agriculture is only a minor part of the Israeli economy, which is based on services, weapons, and other high technology, and dependence on U.S. foreign aid. In contrast, Palestinian agriculture, severely restricted by the Israeli occupation and settlement policy, is the heart of their economy. Local farmers near the village of Uja have together organized an agricultural cooperative to assist each other in responding to the conditions imposed by the occupation. They share scarce resources and information and grow seedlings to overcome collectively the effects of Israeli policy on their livelihood and their community. In the West Bank village of Merda, in the northern mountainous region near the town of Nablus, one shallow well is the only source of water for the entire population of 2,000 people. The village depends on the well not only for drinking water, but also for irrigation. Like all the Palestinians under occupation, the villagers of Merda are prohibited from digging deeper wells, and even from improving their existing ones. They have no recourse in the courts, and since they are not legal citizens, they have no due process of law or civil rights in these or other matters. On the hilltop just above Merda village sits the Israeli settlement Ariel, one of the largest in the West Bank and presently undergoing expansion. Ariel was established in 1978, part of one of the settlement blocks intended to encircle and eventually contain Palestinian urban growth in Nablus and surrounding towns. Among Ariel's residents are U.S. citizens, Soviet and Sephardic Jews, and Europeans, and high technology research and production is a large part of their relatively self-contained local economy. The expansion of Ariel and other settlements, and the building of new ones, has increased at such a dramatic pace that in the 18 months after January of 1990, almost 10% of the land in the West Bank was confiscated by the Israeli government. The latest wave of settlement construction is called the Seven Stars Plan. 7 new colonies that straddle the Green Line, which divides Israel proper from the West Bank. The intention is to obscure and eventually erase the distinction between the Jewish state and the Palestinian land it occupies. Both Israeli political parties support the settlement policy, despite its violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which states, quote, "The occupying power shall not transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies." Despite the U.S. government's stated objections to settlements, its continuing aid to Israel in effect subsidizes their development.
Ariel was founded in 1978, but the idea of Ariel actually began in 1973. At that time, the Minister of Defense was Moshe Dayan, and he made a call to the people of Israel to settle this area of the country. And I assume that you know where you are on the map. Okay.
Spokeswoman Dina Shalit, a Canadian immigrant.
There was a group of employees of the Israeli defense industries that as a group decided to answer this call. And 40 employees and their families, led by our present mayor, though he wasn't the mayor all the way through, decided to sort of take up this challenge. They formed what's called a nucleus that would eventually settle the area. Well, first of all, in the 13 years that we're in existence, we've never had an incident within the limits of Ariel. Pre-Intifada, I probably would have said that we are the proof, that coexistence can work. But of course things have changed somewhat since then. And in a way it's really a tragedy on a personal level for us, because I'm not going to pretend there was a love affair going on, but we were good neighbors, really good neighbors. And a lot of friendships had formed over the years. They started maybe on a business basis or commercial basis, but friendships were created. And what's happened since the Intifada started is the whole relationship between the Jewish and Arab community, here anyway, has become like a one-way street. In other words, 500 or 600 Arabs still come into work in Ariel every day, still avail themselves of the services of the city, the shopping services, medical services, whatever. But we no longer feel safe going into Arab villages. We can't. And there was a time where, on a Saturday, you'd find half of Ariel in the adjacent Arab villages doing their shopping. And it was almost like a social thing.
In the southern part of the West Bank lies the Palestinians' third largest city, Al-Khalil, or Hebron. This area, 15 miles south of Bethlehem, is dependent on agriculture and day labor inside Israel. Most of its 50,000 residents are Muslims and have maintained their traditional agrarian culture. In the heart of the old city, Israeli settlers confiscated several houses, shops, and a bus station in 1968 to form a settlement. Later that year, Israelis established a second one, overlooking Palestinian farms nearby. This settlement, Kiryat Arba, became the home of the militant settlers movement Gush Imunim. Meir Kahane, right-wing leader of the Israeli settlers, lived in Kiryat Arba. Like most other residents here, he openly advocated the forced expulsion of all Palestinians from the occupied territories, what is euphemistically called transfer. Dr. Chaim Simons, Director of Educational Resource Center, Kiryat Arba.
Well, it is the only humane institution. Of course, at the time, it is traumatic to be transferred. If you move from Washington from Seattle to some other town, it's already an upheaval. But afterwards, in the long-term solution, it is the best. And this was the only way to end the Jewish-Arab conflict. One would have to work out exactly the details of what methods would be used. Sometimes transfer has to be done by actual force, other times by persuasion, by inducements. One couldn't give a specific answer on the spot how. One would have to see, studied on the One will have to look on the ground and see what was the best solution to be done at the time, how to accomplish such a thing. But otherwise, the only other solution will be if you don't do a transfer, you'll end up with a liquidation of the Jewish state.
The United States gives Israel over $5 billion of direct and indirect aid annually, and over a third of its military aid worldwide. There is no U.S. oversight on the use of these funds. The U.S. may guarantee a $10 billion loan to Israel in 1992 for housing Soviet immigrants. "1,000 Palestinians have been killed since 1988. 19,000 are currently in Israeli prisons, the highest rate of imprisonment in the world. Torture in these prisons is widespread and well documented. Tens of thousands are disabled and without work, and hundreds have been deported. Yet their national uprising for independence and their decades of resistance continue." Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, Birzeit University.
I had to see 4 of my students die before my eyes, shot by Israeli soldiers on campus. I had to cradle the head of a dying student. And this happened even before the Intifada. I had to see scores of students shot and injured. I've had to transport them in my own car through checkposts to hospitals. My children had to see the blood in the seats of the car and had to witness and feel the trauma of the killing of innocent Palestinians constantly throughout their childhood. This type of treatment of educational institutions and of human beings, of individuals, is something that is beyond description, it's beyond words, and I don't see how Israel has gotten away with it for so long. I don't see why the world has not said enough. The Palestinians cannot constantly be the victims of Israeli brutality, and Israel has to acknowledge the principle of limits and accountability. Moral limits, political limits, geographical limits. Israel has to be subject to all the limits of the other states of the world. We cannot be constantly paying the price of Israel's flagrant violations of human rights, of international law, of the Fourth Geneva Convention, even of the most basic norms of civilized behavior.
Israeli attorney Leah Tzemel, human rights advocate for the Palestinians.
If we believed, we Jews believed that we have some uniqueness because we were scattered for so many years, or because we were chased and hated for so many years because of our religion, etc. We find ourselves at the end of the 20th century just like any other South African white. No uniqueness anymore. Stand on the mountain and shout. Shout, shout, shout. Not talk, not explain, just shout.
What you don't know won't hurt you. Each year, over 5 billion pounds of toxic chemicals are released into the air in the United States. These emissions cause over 2,000 cancer deaths a year. No news is good news. Our nation is littered with over 300,000 hazardous waste sites, which leak poisons into the water supplies of 120 million Americans. Ignorance is bliss. 3 out of 5 Americans live in an area where the air is contaminated beyond federal health standards. Chances are the air, the water, or the land where you live is endangering the health of you and your family. In 1986, a law was passed that gives you the right to know if the area in which you live is contaminated by toxic chemicals. Wouldn't you like to know?
Hello, I'm Brenda Humes. I'm new to the Tampa area, but I discovered Deep Dish a long time ago in Chicago, Illinois. And I suggest that everyone should watch Deep Dish television because you're tuning into the best of public access in a new series of programs. See the award-winning series shown in over 300 cities and towns across the nation. Deep Dish.